Kong, home to over 7 million people and Asia's premier financial hub. It's the gateway to China, the world's second largest economy. But months of civil unrest and a new security law imposed by Beijing are threatening the city's identity. Can Hong Kong, known for its tenacity and entrepreneurial spirit, keep its status as a global powerhouse? Welcome to Talking Business Asia. I'm Karishma Vaswani. For decades, Hong Kong has been a thriving city, straddling east and west, where you'll find one of the world's busiest container ports and the fifth largest stock market. But there's more to this city than just money, like free speech and vibrant media. Beijing's introduction of a national security law, though, has some asking whether those days are over. Let's take a look back at the recent events that led to this moment, starting with the proposed extradition law last year.
What we're witnessing here in Hong Kong tonight is a Hong Kong government that is determined, it seems, to push ahead with an incredibly controversial extradition law.
I guess we feel angry and we don't get respected by our own government.
At the heart of this protest is the extradition bill, the controversial extradition bill, which has been suspended. But for many people here, it's simply not enough. They want it to be withdrawn altogether.
They've just broken through the window of the Legco building here behind me.
Riot police have come in to clear people out of this area. And this is now what's happening every weekend in Hong Kong.
The question is, how much longer will the Hong Kong government put up with this?
The government will formally withdraw the bill.
We must take powerful measures to lawfully prevent, stop, and punish them.
This was the moment China tightened its grip on Hong Kong. Under the national security law, many of the acts of protest that have rocked Hong Kong over the past year could now be classed as subversion or secession and punished with up to life in prison.
Because Beijing's not just getting more powers, it's actually getting absolute total power.
This law is only targeted on a very few criminals.
This is the end of Hong Kong. This is the end of one country, two systems. Make no mistake about it.
Well, joining me from Hong Kong is Edward Yao, the city's Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development. It's good to see you, Mr. Yao. Let me start by asking you, is China's new national security law imposed in Hong Kong the end of one country, two systems?
I think quite the contrary. The enactment of the national security law is necessitated by two things. One is to plug the constitutional loophole, which we have left vacant since the unification with mainland China 23 years ago, and also necessitated by the social unrest that Hong Kong has undergone late last year, which we have seen unprecedented level of violence and disturbances. So like any other countries in the world, how to protect the nation and the city against any threat of national security is a matter, of course, for all nations, all places. Hong Kong is just doing the same as all other places.
But the breadth of this law, the way that it's worded so ambiguously, the speed at which it was pushed through, all of these things, Mr. Yao, really concerning international investors, and they're worried about how their investments will remain safe in Hong Kong. What are you saying to reassure them?
Late last year, because of the social unrest, a lot of international chambers came to me sort of asking what government could do to restore law and order, which Hong Kong enjoyed for decades. Hong Kong was ranked one of the top 10 safest cities. But as you can see in late last year, street violence, petrol bombs, attacks on bodies and individuals and also shops and companies had in fact sort of put Hong Kong in a very dangerous situation. In addition to plugging that constitutional loophole, well, part of the purpose of this national security law is to restore law and order and stability, which is needed by both local and international community. But one very important pillar supporting Hong Kong is one country, two system, which also provides for the very important pillars that uphold Hong Kong. That includes the rule of law, the respect of the judicial independence, which are very important pillars, particularly to international business sector, because, well, they come to do business in Hong Kong. They want legal certainty. They want their rights being protected. That's one very important pillar. The second pillar is, in fact, freedom being upheld. Hong Kong, as we all know, is one of the freest society, and also in terms of economic freedom. That's why we have been constantly ranked very, very high within the top 1 or 2 by international sort of think tanks as the freest economy in the world. Thirdly, of course, is the open and competitive environment, which is also premised on the 2 pillars I mentioned. Without those, it will be hard to maintain this open and competitive environment.
How much can you guarantee that Hong Kong's judiciary will remain independent in the future?
There is sufficient protection in Constitution, in the very important pillars that has supported Hong Kong over the decades, that would remain, and therefore they are the best assurance.
We have seen at least one example of a bank, an international bank, choosing to locate or to position its CEO in Singapore. Is Hong Kong losing its crown as Asia's premier financial hub?
But if a relocation of one CEO would take away the jewel of the crown, then I think, well, all city will be subject to that scorecard, because, well, as international businessmen, they are, of course, free to choose for whatever reason. Now, I think the fact that over 9,000 international firms choose Hong Kong as the regional headquarters for them speaks for itself. So in a way, I think business decisions are based on confidence. And also, they will judge by themselves whether Hong Kong remain the best place for doing business.
How important is China to Hong Kong's future growth?
Hong Kong is China's sort of the most international city. But at the same time, Hong Kong is also the most, or the best access into the mainland for the international community. Up to today, still half of the investment or major sort of trading between mainland and the world come through Hong Kong. We are also seeing a lot of mainland companies using Hong Kong as a springboard going to the wider world for sort of our investment or for trading, or sometimes coming to Hong Kong to enjoy the professional services, which has a global sort of network. I think that's the role that Hong Kong will continue to serve. But I think there is also 2 driving engines which Hong Kong enjoy. One is when China goes out, be they under the Belt and Road or sort of investment flow, Hong Kong stands in forefront, helping this sort of a mainland company going out, and also putting ourselves as the listing place. But at the same time, Hong Kong and also the adjacent area, which we call the Greater Bay Area, which is in 9 cities together with Macau and Hong Kong, making up a cluster of very prosperous sort of a region, mainly the sort of emerging middle income group of the mainland. So these itself offer a very immediate marketplace with a lot of Hong Kong investment already gone in, and also a lot of firms sort of trying to sort of go out to the global market. I think these are the positive factors that support Hong Kong as the regional hub.
This is all happening against a backdrop of the pandemic, Mr. Yao. How long do you think it will take for the Hong Kong economy to recover?
I think that's a $1 million question. I can only say that, well, Hong Kong has seen SARS, which we sort of struggled very, very hard back in 2003. We have this bitter experience of sort of overcoming a major epidemic. We have also seen Hong Kong's economy sort of bouncing back, not by closing our doors, but actually sort of making our doors widely open.
What is your vision for Hong Kong over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think we'll remain international, we'll remain open, we'll remain a marketplace, and not just for mainland, but also for this part of Asia. So I think money is finding Hong Kong as the place for financial center.
As you've just heard from Hong Kong's Commerce Secretary Edward Yao, it's business as usual. But not all international companies there are convinced of that. The American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong has been surveying some of its members, and 34% said they were extremely concerned about the national security law. Over half said their main concern was that the law would jeopardize Hong Kong's status as a financial hub. Tara Joseph is the president of AmCham in Hong Kong. Tara, good to see you. We've just heard from the Commerce Secretary in Hong Kong, who says that the pillars of Hong Kong, rule of law, transparency, that won't change. What do businesses need to see to believe that?
The first and foremost is rule of law, and a sense that the courts and contracts and all the systems and activities around the judiciary are fair and free. A crack within the judiciary would be a very negative sign for business overall, no matter what sector. In addition, open internet, so WhatsApp, Facebook, Google, all those things that international businesses and folks living here really depend on, that is utterly key for people to feel comfortable and feel like they can trade at an international level.
How much do businesses really care about freedom and democracy versus stability?
That's a difficult question because you cannot say it would be the same for every business. People who want stability, retailers, restaurants, tourism, those folks feel like having the streets being clean and quiet could really help their businesses. Sectors that are worried about the situation, the media, obviously, independent researchers, non-for-profit companies. And then there are the money sectors, and I'll put financial services at the top of that. Financial services is here largely to make money and to move money. And as long as they are able to trade freely, and as long as they are able to see that gateway of financial services coming in and out of China, they're not so desperately worried.
What's your vision of what Hong Kong will look like in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's inevitable that Hong Kong will start to feel more like a mainland city because we will likely have more mainland businesses here. A lot of the trade will be focused on the mainland. I think people will get used to a different type of Hong Kong where maybe self-censorship and not speaking as freely will happen. A lot of the rest depends on things that we really can't define right now. It really depends whether globalization can find a new success story, whether China will become more integrated. Then Hong Kong, of course, has a very central role to play as a major connection city for the world.
Thanks, Tara Joseph from Hong Kong's American Chamber of Commerce. So, what's it like living in the middle of all of this, trying to get a job, run a business, or just earn a living? We look at what life is like for ordinary Hong Kongers in Asia's premier financial hub right after this short break. Don't go away.
The hits to the economy are staggering. It's happening in nearly every single country. This virus respects no borders.
Look at all these businesses closed. That one closed. Next door closed.
It's unprecedented, historic. Never before in the history of oil trading has the price fallen below zero.
Travel restrictions are decimating the airline industry, with many saying it's just a matter of time before another carrier goes bust.
3/4 of America's economy depend on consumer spending. It is hammering the once robust American economy.
South Africa's economic hardship will continue. The economy is set to contract by over 6%.
In Wuhan, China, where the global pandemic started, people are slowly going back to work.
What happens to these companies financially when this is all over?
There is no simple trade-off between health and the economy.
You're watching Talking Business Asia. We've been looking at the situation in Hong Kong, the protests and the national security law, and asking whether its financial future is intact. So how is this affecting the more than 7 million residents in the city? I spoke to some of them. Here are their stories.
Economically, it's very hard for Hong Kong not to rely on China. Even our water and electricity is from the mainland. It's difficult for Hong Kong to move away from this reliance on China.
Just 1 year ago, Victor was making good money, ferrying Chinese visitors around Hong Kong. But street protests kept them away, and the coronavirus meant they didn't come back. So he took a job as a public bus driver, earning half of what he used to. He still counts himself lucky to have a stable job.
My generation is now mostly focused on earning money and then leaving Hong Kong. Even I think like this. Because after only 20-odd years from the handover, things have become this bad in Hong Kong. No one knows what things will look like after 50 years.
We all know the best way to be wealthy is to embrace the opportunity from China, but I don't think it is like money or financial success is the only measure of human life.
The future should have been bright for Thomas, a software engineering graduate in Hong Kong who didn't want to be identified. He couldn't get a job with an international company because of the weak economy and was unable to contemplate a future with a Chinese-led one.
I really don't want to work for companies or like government that do such like cruel thing to citizens who just want to voice out their opinion. And to me, working for them is a kind of support to them, which I don't want to support them at all.
It would be very difficult, very painful to suddenly get up and go anywhere. I don't want to leave. I don't plan to leave.
Look at this gorgeous lining. Yeah.
Hong Kong is the only home businessman Roshan Malwani knows. His family came here from India more than 6 decades ago, making their fortune by tailoring suits for clients from all over the world. For him, it's still a great place to do business and will continue to be, even with greater Chinese influence.
I want to continue doing what I've always been doing, and I think I can. I think the increasing Chinese influence and the national security law has had no effect on my business and hasn't had any effect on many of the business around us.
As you've just heard, businesses have found a way to keep operating in the midst of all of this. But will that continue in the future? And can Hong Kong keep its crown as Asia's premier financial hub? Let's talk to Curtis Chin in Virginia. He's a former US ambassador to the Asian Development Bank. And Wei-Jian Shan is an economist and the CEO of private equity firm PAG Group. He's in Hong Kong. Shan, let me start by asking you, are we watching the slow decline of Hong Kong?
I don't think so. Where do you see signs of that? I think to the contrary. Hong Kong is growing as the international financial center. Earlier this year, when I was talking with other people, when people asked me about the size of the capital market here in Hong Kong, specifically the stock market, I was using a figure of $4 trillion. And that is more than 10 times the GDP of Hong Kong, which is about 360 billion US dollars. Today, I use the number $5 trillion because there's a lot of capital flowing into Hong Kong, and the size of the capital market has increased.
Curtis, we've had months of unrest, political protests, and now this new law that hands over control of social stability effectively to Beijing. How much does that threaten Hong Kong's allure to international investors and companies?
Indeed, Hong Kong has fundamentally changed with the security law. But I think that's a different issue than whether or not Hong Kong will be an international financial center. In many ways, it's a tale of two cities. One, it's the international financiers, where Hong Kong continues to be an amazing place. But then there's the daily life of Hong Kong people. And some of the issues Hong Kong people face have predated these protests. Issues such as inequality, issues such as that divide between rich and poor. So certainly, in my opinion, the death of Hong Kong as an international financial center has certainly been exaggerated. But indeed, it doesn't mean that there'll be new challengers. And where Hong Kong ranks right now very well might not be where it ranks just 3 or 4 years out there.
Shan, we've heard on this program that foreign businesses are increasingly worried. AmCham says its members are looking to move elsewhere. How much does this detract from what makes Hong Kong special? That secret sauce, the reason why these international companies come there in the first place?
Well, I think the question is probably asked too early, because you're talking about whether or not some people may fear what would happen to Hong Kong after the adoption of the national security law, And I can tell you that 2 months ago, there was even more fear. And now people have calmed down, and people have seen that the law is within the confines of Hong Kong's judicial system, and that is a common law system under the basic law framework under which freedom of speech, human rights are protected. So over time, people will realize that Hong Kong will remain a free and open society. And the same thing happened, by the way, before 1997, before the sovereignty of Hong Kong was handed over from Britain to China.
We're hearing, Curtis, from people in the finance industry, analysts writing reports that are hesitant or censoring themselves from telling the truth about companies because of this new law. How damaging is that for Hong Kong's independence as a financial center?
What are the fundamental kind of, principles I think an international financial center has to have? And one of them is that free flow of information. So very clearly, if people begin to self-censor themselves, that's an issue. I think the bigger challenge also for Hong Kong, and here a big difference between Hong Kong and Singapore, and I have to admit I'm a big proponent of Singapore, is that ultimately when I think about financial centers, who will control their destiny? For Singapore, it will be Singaporeans. For Hong Kong, it will not be Hong Kong people. It will be Beijing that will control the future of Hong Kong, for good and for bad. And so I think that's one of the challenges when we talk about, will Hong Kong remain an international financial center? Where some of the things that you mentioned, where people begin to fear things, not because of Hong Kong government, but because of what the Beijing government might do.
I don't think that China has a specific plan for Hong Kong. And I don't agree that the future of Hong Kong as a financial center is in the hands of Beijing. I think it very much is in the hands of Hong Kong itself, whether or not it will be able to adopt policies to encourage continuously foreign investment. And there's no reason for Beijing to want to damage Hong Kong. After all, Hong Kong is part of China.
Sean, when you look at the history of Hong Kong, it used to be the case that Chinese companies would go there to interact with international capital. But now increasingly, we're seeing mainland companies go to Hong Kong to list to access Chinese money. How's that different then from another Chinese city like Shanghai? What makes Hong Kong different?
I would say it's not just Chinese money. It is both international capital as well as capital coming out of China. By and large, Hong Kong is open to the world capital markets. So capital from all over the world will come to Hong Kong, will continue to do so.
Hong Kong will continue to benefit as China continues to grow. But there again, as I think longer term, 10 years out, 20 years out, I think Singapore again will be a center for growth as an international financial center. And not just because of Southeast Asia, but also because from there it's the relative proximity to Australia, to India. So we may well see over time the emergence of other international financial centers, whether within China or elsewhere in the region, including Hong Kong, of course, but also beyond Hong Kong. And I think that's a good thing.
Curtis Chin, Wei-Jian Shan, thanks for joining us. As you've heard, there's little doubt that Hong Kong will remain a financial center. But now, more than ever before, its destiny will be shaped by the rise of China. What do you think? Tweet me your thoughts at BBC Karishma. From me and the team, thanks for watching.